My mill publicly shamed me in front of her friends. You'll never measure up, but when my husband showed up with evidence of her lies, she was completely exposed. It was one of those late summer nights in Texas when the heat clung to everything like a wet rag. Ben and I were in our tiny living room, relaxing after a long week. I was in my usual spot on the couch, legs tucked under me, a mug of coffee resting on the table beside me. Ben sat across from me, staring at his phone, eyebrows drawn tight. "What's up?" I asked, sensing something was bothering him. He sighed, looking up, a flicker of worry in his eyes. "Mom wants us to come over this Friday. She's throwing one of her get-togethers." I laughed, half amused, half nervous. "Get-togethers? Don't you mean mini Gatsby's?" Ben chuckled, but his smile didn't reach his eyes. "Yeah, something like that." I knew what Diana's small gatherings meant. Her home in Highland Park was a full-on mansion, complete with towering columns and a lawn that looked like it was snipped by hand. Every time I set foot in her house, I felt like I'd accidentally wandered into a movie set. Or more accurately, the set of some over-the-top reality TV show. You know the type. Husbands with shiny watches, wives with designer purses that cost more than a month's rent, and a constant undercurrent of competition in every conversation. I chewed my lip, thinking. Do we really have to go? I mean, what if we pretended to be sick or something? Ben sighed, dropping his phone on the table. "I know, Sarah. Believe me, I'd rather spend Friday anywhere else, but if we don't show up, you know she'll take it as some kind of declaration of war." He wasn't wrong. Diana had a knack for interpreting even the smallest things as personal slights. If we skipped her party, she'd find some way to make it into a scandal. "All right," I said, feigning bravado. "Let's go, but if she says anything about my look again, I'm telling you right now, I might not hold back." Ben smiled, pulling me in for a quick hug. "We'll get through it together." When Friday came around, I spent longer than usual getting ready, agonizing over every detail. I had a black dress I loved, it was simple but flattering, and I thought it was perfect. But when I looked at myself in the mirror, I could almost hear Diana's voice. "Oh, you look so comfortable, dear. Isn't that sweet?" "Maybe I should wear something flashier," I mumbled, chewing my lip. "Or like fancier?" Ben walked in, saw the look on my face, and gently squeezed my shoulder. "You look amazing. You don't need to change a thing." I took a deep breath, trying to believe him. "All right. But just back me up in there, okay? No throwing me to the wolves." Ben smiled, his face softening. "Always." As we drove up to Diana's house, the sprawling estate loomed larger and larger. The lights from her yard illuminated the manicured trees and bushes, casting long shadows over the driveway. I could already see a few guests mingling by the grand front doors, clutching glasses of champagne. When we stepped out of the car, Ben reached for my hand, giving it a reassuring squeeze. "Here we go," he murmured. As we walked up the steps, Diana appeared at the door, her perfectly sculpted blonde hair shining under the porch light. She was dressed head to toe in white, looking like some kind of high society angel. But the moment she saw us, her expression shifted just a little. "Oh, Ben, Sarah," she said, pulling Ben in for a hug before giving me a polite air kiss. She stepped back, her eyes lingering on my dress. "How understated." I bit back the urge to respond, settling for a tight smile. "Good to see you, Diana." Yes, she murmured, already distracted by another guest who was calling her over. She threw a quick wave over her shoulder. "Help yourselves to drinks, make yourselves at home." "Make ourselves at home?" I muttered, glancing at Ben. Last time I did that, she nearly had a heart attack when I put my feet up on her couch. Ben chuckled, pulling me toward the living room. "Come on, let's find a corner and stay out of the line of fire." We grabbed a couple of glasses of wine from a passing waiter and settled into a quiet spot near the back of the room. All around us, Diana's friends mingled, laughing a little too loudly, their words laced with that particular brand of southern charm that's more like a sharp blade wrapped in silk. I took a sip of my wine, watching them. Every so often, I'd catch Diana glancing over at us, her mouth tightening just a little, as if she was mentally cataloging all the ways I didn't fit into her world. And then, as if summoned by some invisible signal, her best friend, Marcia, appeared beside us. Marcia was the kind of woman who'd perfected the art of giving compliments that felt like insults. She had her brown hair pulled back in a tight bun, her jewelry practically sparkling in the dim lighting. "Well, Diana," she exclaimed, a smile spreading across her heavily made-up face. "Aren't you going to introduce me to your lovely daughter-in-law?" Diana smiled, but it was the kind of smile you'd give someone just before you pulled the rug out from under them. "Oh, yes, of course. Marcia, this is Sarah." Marcia's eyes swept over me, and she nodded approvingly, well, as approvingly as a person like her could. "Oh, Ben's little Kansas girl, isn't that right?" I managed a polite nod, trying not to let my irritation show. That's right. Marcia clucked her tongue, leaning in conspiratorially. You know, I've heard so much about Kansas. It sounds so quaint. All those little fairs and bake sales. Must be such a charming place to grow up. I forced a smile. It is, actually. Good people, good values. Diana sighed dramatically. Oh, Sarah's so down to earth. We all appreciate her humility, don't we, Marcia? Ben tensed beside me, his jaw clenching. But before he could say anything, Marcia's eyes lit up. Oh, Diana, do you remember Sabrina? The air in the room shifted. I could feel the weight of Diana's gaze on me, the anticipation in her silence. Sabrina. I knew the name, but Ben had never shared much about her. I only knew she was the perfect ex who had apparently dazzled everyone with her sophistication. Oh, Sabrina, Diana cooed, as if she were talking about some beloved pet. Yes, of course. How could I forget? Sabrina was such a light. So ambitious. And didn't she just look stunning in anything? I took a long sip of my wine, feeling my stomach twist. I'm sure she was. Wonderful. Diana's lips curved into a smile, barely hiding the mischief. Oh, she was. A real catch. She had such a natural grace, didn't she, Ben? Ben's face was stony, his hand gripping mine tightly. Mom, let's not do this. Diana shrugged, feigning innocence. Oh, come now, Ben. It's not like I'm comparing them. I'm just reminiscing. I felt my pulse in my throat, my heart hammering as the voices around us faded into the background. Marcia laughed, patting Diana's shoulder. Oh, don't worry, dear. We're not trying to make anyone uncomfortable. Oh, of course not, Diana said, smiling sweetly. But you know, Ben, I was just telling Marcia how different things are now. You two have such a modest life together, don't you? I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself. But then Diana leaned forward, lowering her voice like she was sharing a juicy secret. Ben, she said, her tone laced with forced sympathy, did you ever tell Sarah why things ended with Sabrina? I felt Ben tense beside me. He opened his mouth to respond, but Diana cut him off. Oh, don't be shy, she said, feigning innocence. It's just a little family story. And Marcia doesn't know. I glanced at Ben, my heart pounding. He looked trapped, like a deer in headlights. Mom, it's not relevant, Sabrina's in the past. But Diana wasn't letting it go. She leaned in, her smile widening. Oh, but darling, it is relevant. You see, Sabrina didn't leave Ben. He left her. The words hung in the air, sharp and heavy. I felt my stomach drop. Ben had never told me this. He'd always seemed so loyal, so grounded. And now Diana was making it sound like there was some deep, dark secret between us. I looked at Ben, searching his face for some kind of explanation. He avoided my gaze, staring at the floor. Sarah, he said quietly, barely audible over the murmur of voices around us. I didn't want you to know because it doesn't matter. It was a mistake, and I was ashamed of it. Diana laughed, the sound sharp and biting. Oh, ashamed, really? That's not how you felt back then, was it? Ben's face was red, and he looked like he was about to explode. But Diana wasn't finished. Ben was caught up in some little fling, she continued, addressing Marcia now, as if I wasn't even there. He thought he'd found someone better, someone more exciting. And poor Sabrina, well, she was devastated, of course. My throat tightened, the weight of Diana's words settling like a stone in my stomach. This wasn't the Ben I knew. This wasn't the man I'd fallen in love with. I looked at him, waiting for him to deny it, to explain, to tell me it was all some horrible misunderstanding. But he just stood there, his face pale, his shoulders slumped. And then Diana turned to me, her eyes gleaming with something almost triumphant. You see, Sarah, she said, her voice dripping with feigned sympathy, I just don't think you'll ever measure up. Sabrina was perfect for Ben. She had ambition, grace, the whole package. And you? Well, let's just say you're different. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I wanted to scream, to shout, to just leave and never look back. But I didn't want to give her the satisfaction. So I stood my ground, clenching my fists, my voice trembling but steady. I'm sorry you feel that way, Diana. But Ben and I are happy together, and I don't think I need to measure up to anyone's expectations. Diana's eyes flashed, and for a moment, I saw a flicker of anger. She hadn't expected me to fight back. But then, to my surprise, Ben did something I never would have expected. He straightened up, his shoulders squaring as he looked directly at his mother. Mom, enough, he said, his voice steady and cold. I'm done letting you interfere in my life. Sarah is my wife, and I love her. I'm not going to let you tear us apart. Diana's face fell, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Ben. You don't mean that. Yes, I do, he said, his voice unwavering. You've spent years making me feel like nothing I do is good enough for you. But I'm done. Sarah is my choice, and if you can't accept that, then maybe you shouldn't be part of our lives. The room was silent, every eye on us, the air thick with shock. Diana looked around, her face flushed, as if she were searching for support from her friends. But no one moved. Ben turned to me, his eyes softening. Sarah, I'm sorry. I should have told you about Sabrina. I was ashamed, but I should have been honest with you. You are my choice, always. I felt tears prick my eyes as he took my hand, his grip firm and steady. And as we turned to leave, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. I knew that no matter what happened, Ben and I would face it together. As we walked out of that mansion, hand in hand, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. I felt free. As we walked down Diana's grand staircase, the silence behind us was thick, but every step felt lighter. Ben's hand was warm around mine, and the further we got from that house, the more I felt like I could breathe again. We stepped outside, the night air a cool relief against my face. I turned to Ben, and he looked at me with a mixture of sadness and resolve. Sarah, he began, his voice heavy, I'm so sorry. You shouldn't have had to go through that. I shouldn't have let it get to this point. I took a shaky breath, trying to wrap my head around everything that had just happened. Why didn't you ever tell me about Sabrina? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He closed his eyes, rubbing the back of his neck. Because I didn't want you to see me that way, he said finally. I made a mistake, and I was young and stupid. Sabrina and I. It wasn't real. It was what my mom wanted for me, but not what I wanted. I felt a pang of sympathy, but also a lingering hurt. I get it, Ben, I do. But your mom blindsided me back there. I felt like I didn't even know the man standing beside me. He looked at me, his eyes full of regret. I was ashamed. My mom, she has this way of making me feel small. Like I'll never be enough. Sabrina was a safe choice, someone who'd blend right into her world. But you? You're my choice, Sarah. I know it's hard to believe right now, but I promise you. I softened, seeing the sincerity in his face. I wish you'd told me. It feels like you hid a part of yourself from me. He nodded, pulling me close. You're right. I messed up, and I should have been honest. But tonight, standing up to her, it felt like breaking free of years of control. I know I'm asking a lot, but can you forgive me? I took a deep breath, trying to shake off the weight of his mother's words. The doubt she'd planted, the way she tried to wedge herself between us. But here was Ben, vulnerable and willing to make things right. Okay, I said slowly, resting my head against his chest. We'll get through this, but I need you to be open with me. All of it, no more secrets. He held me tight, whispering, I promise. We stood there for a moment in the driveway, just holding each other, grounding ourselves in the silence and the reality of what had just happened. But then, as we were about to get into the car, I heard footsteps behind us. Ben. Sarah. Diana's voice sliced through the night, and we turned to see her standing at the top of the stairs, her face flushed with anger. Marcia stood just inside the doorway, watching, her expression a strange mix of curiosity and sympathy. Ben's grip on my hand tightened. What do you want, Mom? Diana's eyes narrowed. What do I want? I want you to come back inside and stop making a scene. Ben shook his head, his voice calm but firm. No, Mom. We're done with this. Done with the games, done with the judgment. Diana's expression faltered, a flicker of panic flashing across her face. Ben, you're overreacting. I was just trying to help you see what you're sacrificing by choosing. No, Ben interrupted, his voice strong and steady. You were trying to control me. You've always tried to control me. And I'm done letting you. Diana's face turned ashen. You ungrateful boy, she spat. After everything I've done for you? The sacrifices I've made? Sacrifices? Ben laughed bitterly. Mom, everything you did was for yourself. I was just a pawn in your perfect little picture. Diana's hand shook as she pointed at me. She's taken you away from me. Can't you see that? She's ruined everything. I felt a surge of anger, but Ben squeezed my hand, stopping me. He looked his mother in the eye, his voice laced with sadness. No, Mom. You did this. You tried to control every part of my life, to make me fit some mold you created. But I'm not going to let you anymore. Diana stared at him, her face a mask of shock and hurt. For the first time, she seemed genuinely at a loss for words. You need to decide what's more important, Mom, Ben continued, his voice softening, your image or your family. Because right now, you're choosing one over the other. She blinked, her mouth opening and closing, and for a brief moment, I saw a glimmer of realization in her eyes. But then she turned away, her expression hardening. I have nothing to apologize for, she said stiffly. If you want to throw away your life for that, she said, gesturing toward me, then don't expect my blessing. Ben's face softened, a mixture of sadness and disappointment. I'm not asking for your blessing, Mom. I'm telling you that this is my life, and Sarah is my wife. And if you can't accept that, then maybe we'll have to go our separate ways. Diana's face twisted, and she muttered something under her breath. But she didn't follow us as we got into the car, and as we pulled away, I saw her standing there, a lone figure in the doorway of her mansion. The car ride home was silent, both of us lost in our thoughts. I could tell Ben was struggling with what had happened, and I felt a strange mixture of relief and sadness. Relief that we had finally stood up to her, but sadness that it had come to this. When we finally reached home, Ben turned to me, his face tired but determined. I meant what I said, Sarah. I'm done letting her control us. I nodded, taking his hand. I know, Ben. I hope she realizes what she's losing. He sighed, rubbing his temples. Maybe she will. Maybe she won't. But right now, I just want to focus on us. On building a life that's ours. We went inside, and as we settled on the couch, Ben wrapped his arms around me, holding me close. For the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of peace, a sense of security that hadn't been there before. Over the next few weeks, Diana kept her distance. She didn't call, didn't text, and though Ben seemed relieved, I could see the hurt in his eyes every time he checked his phone, hoping for a message that never came. But gradually, we began to find our rhythm. We started making plans for the future, talking about moving to a bigger place, maybe even starting a family. And every time we talked about it, I felt a little of that doubt, that insecurity Diana had planted in me, start to fade away. Then one Saturday morning, as we were having breakfast, Ben's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, his expression hardening. It's her, he murmured, showing me the message. All it said was, I'd like to meet. Just the two of us. I hesitated, unsure of what to say. Part of me didn't trust her intentions, but I knew that Ben needed closure, one way or another. Go, I said softly, taking his hand. Maybe this is what you both need. He nodded, kissing my forehead before he left. Hours passed, and I tried not to let my mind wander, but every few minutes, I'd glance at the clock, wondering how it was going. Finally, just as the sun was setting, Ben walked through the door. I stood up, searching his face for answers. How did it go? He sighed, dropping his keys on the table. She apologized. She admitted that she'd been too controlling, too focused on what she thought was best for me instead of letting me live my own life. A wave of relief washed over me, but I could see the weight of the conversation still hanging on him. She said she'd try, he continued, his voice thick with emotion. She doesn't fully understand, and I don't know if she ever will. But she said she doesn't want to lose me. She wants to try to make things right. I felt a flicker of hope, a tentative relief. Do you believe her? He nodded slowly. I do. But I told her that if she ever tries to come between us again, that's it. I'm done for good. I reached for his hand, squeezing it. I'm proud of you, Ben. I know that wasn't easy. He smiled, pulling me into his arms. Thank you. For sticking by me through all of this. We stood there, wrapped in each other's arms, feeling the weight of everything that had happened finally start to lift. It wouldn't be perfect, and I knew that Diana would always be Diana. But she had taken a step toward change, and for the first time, I felt like there was a glimmer of hope for our family. And as Ben and I sat together, sharing a quiet moment in our little home, I realized something. This was what family was. It wasn't about perfection or meeting someone else's standards. It was about choosing each other, every day, even when things got messy and hard. With Diana, we didn't know what the future held. Maybe things would get better, maybe they wouldn't. But either way, we had each other. And in that moment, as I looked at the man I loved, I knew that was all that mattered. We had each other, and we'd face whatever came next, together.